Hello everyone. So in continuation with our constraint layout, this is part number 2, right? So here in this video, we are going to see two important properties. One we have already discussed, but that will be discussed in this video in more detail. That is known as the bias, right? And another one is the gone margin, right? So first of all, let me start with the bias. So in my previous video, we discussed that. So here is one button, right? And I'm clicking another button, or you can say it's a one button is enough, right? So here I'm just going to give the all constraint to this button. So this is known as the bidirectional button. So whenever you are providing the bidirectional constraint to any view, you will see that this particular biasings are visible, right? Suppose if I'm deleting this, right? So you can see that this particular bias is gone, right? But suppose if I again enable this, then this bias will be visible, right? So this is known as the bias, right? So as I told you before that you just move this particular view from here to here and from here to here, right? So here one another view is there, that suppose if you set this particular bias, right, from the code, right? So here you can see that we have constraint horizontal bias, right? One property, and another property is control constraint vertical bias, right? So suppose if I'm going to provide this particular horizontal bias, like suppose 0.3, right? So you can see this particular button move from here to here, right? Similar way, if I just going to provide the constraint bias for vertical 0.3 again, so it will be consume this particular space like this, right? Suppose by default it is a 0.5, so it's a 50, right? So that you can observe over here in attributes that it sets as a 50-50, okay, right? So from here you can provide the biasing to this particular view or any view, right? So according to your requirement you can provide it here, right? Suppose say for example here, if I'm going to provide this particular attribute as a 24 margin, right? So here you can see that this particular thing is a straight line, right? So that consumes the 24 margin. Okay. So that particular button will be here. This is a spring view you can see, so that contains this space from over here. So suppose say for example, if I'm giving a both side, or let me give you the example that let's give it to the both side, right? And now I'm just going to change that match constraint, right? So you can observe that this button only will contain this much length, right? So whatever margin is that, so that is not considered, that will be calculated, that will be subtracted from the constraint, right? So I hope you got the meaning of this whenever you are doing this margin kind of thing, and you can use this biasing, right? So here you can see that this is a biasing, okay. Now the another thing I want to show you that that is known as the gone margin, right? So suppose say let me consider this as a default, right? So right now I'm just going to remove the all the constraint, right? I have to one button, okay. This is one button, this is my second button, okay, and this is my third button, right? So here you can observe that I have three buttons, right? So I'm just going to give the constraint it from over here. I'm just going to give the constraint it to from here, and I'm just going to give the constraint from here, right? So here from you can see that I have just provided the constraint on this side only, so this is only visible. So I'm just going to provide the 16 dp margin, right? Again this, so here I'm just going to provide the 16 dp margin, and from here again I'm just going to provide the 16 dp margin, right? So all have same margin ratio, right? So whatever constraint you are setting, so according to that only that particular margin width is going to be visible over here, right? So now which property we are going to use? So we are going to use a gone margin, right? So here you will see one visibility property, right? So you can imagine that suppose this is the middle button, right? And if I'm going to set here we have a three values, right? Visible, invisible, and gone. So visible right now it's a visible, right? So, what is the difference between gone and invisible, right? So, suppose say for example, if I'm going to set the visibility of this particular button as a invisible, so you just observe that that button is not going to visible right now. See, but it takes up that particular space, right? So, whatever space is there, so that will be taken up by that particular button, right? And suppose for the same button, if I'm going to click it visible, so it is visible. Now, instead of invisible, I'm going to use the gone, right? So here you observe when I click on the gone, then that particular view is not visible and the space is also not visible, right? But you can observe the thing over here that this particular button has a 16 dp margin, right? So that particular margin is retained, right? So it uses its own margin over here, right? Now, suppose if I'm going to use invisible, visible, so that particular thing you can observe over here. So it is like that. Now it is visible, right? So now suppose if I delete this button, right? And sorry, let me first set it as invisible, gone, right? So that button is over here. Now from the component tree, I'm just going to delete this button. Okay. So here you can see that this particular constraint I'm setting over here. Oh, so here you can see that I'm just providing the constraint to this and I'm just using a 16 dp. Okay. Now, suppose say for example, I'm just going to use this as a 24 dp, right? So now my first button is at of 24 dp, right? This is a 16 dp, right? So now you can observe. Now here, if I'm going to set the visibility gone, then you can observe this button uses obviously its own constraint that is 16 dp. But suppose say for example, I want to use the default that is the first button was using that 24 dp, right? So for that, we are just going to define the particular gone margin, right? So here in a coding section, you can just go over there, right? And for this, you can just use that for this button gone margin, right? So gone margin right is equals to 24 dp. You can observe, right? So here you have set the 24 dp gone margin. So now if you go over here and you can just use the visibility gone, right? Then it uses the, let me refresh this, force refresh layout, right? Sorry, so gone margin left. Okay. So here, I just need to use gone margin left. So I'm just using left side. So you can observe that instead of 16, this is showing 16, but actually it is displaying the 24 dp, right? So you can observe. Now suppose say for example, if I'm just going in my component tree, right? And I'm just using this visibility as a visible. Let me go to the design so you can observe the things, right? Now this is visible. So you can see it uses the 24 dp. Now again, if I'm going to make it gone, so now though I have set the margin as a 16 dp, it uses the 24 dp default margin. So whenever the situation is like that, you want to use the first views margin by default, right? So at that time, we are just going to use this gone margins over here, right? So that can be set from here, margin left, or you can set from the attribute also, right? So this is the very important property, guys, right? You have to deal with whenever you are going to design a very complex design, right? So once you want to hide the view, you want to visible the view again, right? And still you maintain the particular margin. So at that time, these properties are very useful, right? So that's it, guys. So these are the very important properties, right? Biasing and bond margin you can use in your designing. Thanks for watching.